The fact that both air and water are naturally clear and odourless was something that Oswald found marvellous. What if the air was a sulphurous cloud, or mountain streams were like pea soup, stinking of a sewer? The Making of the English Landscape was one of those books that made Oswald sit up and pay attention. Written by William George Hoskins, it presents the environment we know through the lens of a novel archaeology, showing how everything has been modified by man's activities. There really is nothing in the British Isles which you could properly call wild, except perhaps parts of Wychwood in Oxfordshire, which Oswald accidentally stumbled into one day, or his aunt's garden, which it is totally impossible to stumble into. The gradual man-centred transformation of the natural landscape has happened across the long period of man's rise to earthly dominance, and there is no saying what the current landscape would have been without man, though everything suggests that England would most likely be an oak forest. Oswald lives in a wooded valley, where there is now only 1/10 of the human population that worked there before the Spanish flu. At the bottom of a shaded ravine one day, he discovered an abandoned mill building. Being in the middle of a forest, he immediately assumed it was a sawmill. But inside the building, he found millstones used for grinding wheat into flour. Exploring among the trees on the slope above the stream, he came across dry stone walls, and it became evident that the whole hillside had been made into terraces. It was only after some research that Oswald could accept that the wooded hillside had been wheat fields, terraced from top to bottom, only 100 years ago. In the winter, Oswald went to his woods, where he removed straggly and struggling trees as firewood for the following year, thereby allowing light through to stimulate vigorous new growth. He kept the strong and sturdy trees, though every now and then he felled one that he could take to be sawn. The saw was a trailer to a tractor that parked in a field and sent visitors into ecstasy from the smell of the tannin. If you were making carpentry, you could use the freshly sawn wood directly as posts and beams. But if you were going to make joinery, doors, windows, furniture, you had to leave your planks to dry for a few years, so that when you used them, they did not move too much. The value of the timber, from being only firewood to when it was ready to be made into a tabletop, increased 20-fold, all for the effort of moving the felled tree, sawing it, and letting it dry. No wonder there was a queue at the saw. Oswald, by the way, was an obsessive timekeeper, and had tallied the hours spent improving the woods, bringing the firewood the 2 miles to his house, and cutting and transporting the trees for sawing. He found that in any year, the time he spent was a fraction of the time he previously spent as a commuter in the capital, where working with trees is about as much use as a bicycle to a fish. Could the medullary ray save mankind? Oswald came across it in his O-level biology. It was far more exciting than gamma rays or the splitting of the atom. Whilst many countries have almost accidentally exploited medullary rays, it was the medieval English that developed the technology further than anybody else. And as we know, England once dominated the world. It was probably because the English oak grown on English clay is such a different tree to the continental oaks. The medullary ray is the name for the cells in a tree which connect the heart to the bark, helping the transport of nutrients. Before the industrial saw sliced trees into planks, oak trees would be split by hand. Wood splits most easily when the axe splits the tree in two and then further into many wedges, like cutting up a circular pizza. The split surface is broadly parallel to the medullary rays and can produce a pattern in the face that few other timbers match in beauty. However, splitting a tree into triangular pieces when you are making planks results in much more waste than the slicing of a tree with an industrial saw. A deliberate display of medullary rays, therefore, in your joinery or your furniture shows that you are knowledgeable and discriminating and value the unprovoked beauty the tree is offering you. Meanwhile, factory-produced furniture insults wood by reducing a tree to slivers which are baked in an oven, machined to be glued together, and then machined to any shape you want, as if it is plastic with no inherent quality of its own. There is a satisfying logic in the Latin-based languages that delights Oswald now, simply because he was no more than an average French language student. He had been happily eating croissant for years, thinking that his petit déjeuner was a preparation for his déjeuner, his lunch. But when he had to take his cat to a vet, he was asked to bring her à jeun, i.e., without having eaten. Here, Oswald finally learned that déjeuner meant literally de-fast, or in English, breakfast, though it still left him wondering why the French had their breakfast at lunchtime. On other matters, the French language appeared to have more clarity. The bourgeoisie were simply people that lived in the bourg, the town, not a sector of the population supporting a superficial, materialistic lifestyle. And the peasants were paysans, people of the pays, the country, not the poor, uneducated underclass. The peasants were indeed integrated with the land, easily seen in the naming of French wines, which are known by the place where the vines grow, not by the variety of the grape, just as you would call somebody a Yorkshireman, not a Homo sapiens. In industrial societies, peasants were converted into the working class, before now being subsumed as the aspirant bourgeoisie, developing obsessive habits like continuously mowing grass instead of leaving the flowers to grow to nourish the bees, and taking on endless credit to live a life none of us can afford. It isn't at all difficult for Oswald to notice the 22nd of April every year, since it is his birthday. From childhood, he noticed how the dying daffodils and dandelions were superseded by an explosion of green. He noticed the rapid transformation as the blossoms on the cherry fell like snowfall, just as the vine leaves unfurled and the figs started to form on the branches. In the woods, the ground was carpeted with young oaks, whose innocent leaves might see no more than one summer. The ferns by the stream appeared from nowhere to deploy upwards and outwards as a model for the space satellite. Then one birthday, a friend wished him a happy Earth Day too, and not as a terrible pun. Oswald jealously felt he had to share the day unfairly, like his neighbour, whose birthday was on the 25th of December. But what he didn't like about there being an Earth Day was that people would sing and dance, then return to the far more sustainable activity of progressively making the planet uninhabitable. The meaning of life was a conundrum that Oswald had cracked even before he went to university. Instead, he has been haunted by the mismatch between value and price. The human method, he saw, has been to organise something and then have people pay you eternally for having organised what was already theirs. It was the trick of empire, and now the app. Once having subjugated people, it was only obvious to turn to the other things that could not answer back, organise them, and once more have people pay you eternally for having organised what belonged to nobody. Redefining everything as something that can be bought and sold is an acultural act. It pretends that money has a superior legitimacy, yet any state can artificially produce money out of nowhere, eating next year's harvest today. Oswald's studies emphasize that the human being, as well as being instinctively animal-like, is instinctively cultural. Going to war is a usual combination of the two. Giving something a price when it never had one is the surest way of destroying its cultural value. Once we forget that our Earth is the biological culture in which we thrive, we will have priced ourselves out of the market and destroyed value too. Symbioses vary from relations that are beneficial to one partner and harmful to the other, to relations from which both the partners benefit.